What's the story, everyone? Today I'm going to break down an animation that I did a while back. I still think it holds up pretty well. There's a few nice little tips and cool techniques that are used throughout it. I'm going to walk you through it step by step. And if you're new to editing or if you're just looking for some new ideas, I think this will be really helpful. So stick around, and this is what we're going to learn how to do today. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to basically run through one of these scenes. It's the same throughout the whole video, but I'm just going to break down one of the scenes and you'll get a good grasp of how to do something similar. And yeah, if you want to work alongside me, I'm going to leave all the project files and all the images that I've used in the description on my Patreon below. If not, I'm going to show you some nice ways to kind of get some reference photos now. Yeah, let's just jump right into it. So when you're kind of doing these collage edits, it's good to have a kind of idea of the placement and the main things that you want in the scene. So as you can see here, I have a few different images of gates, a few different images of like derelict houses, and then just similar enough but in black and white, some security cameras that we're going to comp into our scene. So if you really need a scene to look some sort of way and you just can't find the images out there, Midjourney is actually really helpful for this. You can basically pull in an image from Google. So for example, this image of a security camera, it's like an iStock photo. I've brought that into Midjourney and basically just used that as my reference photo. And then you can just obviously use whatever prompt you want. I've just used a photo of a pole with 4 CCTV cameras all pointing in various directions. So as you can see, Midjourney comes back with stuff that you can kind of comp in, and because we're using Photoshop, you can actually make it look like it should be in the scene. That's that part of it. As I said, all the files that I've used will be in the description. So let's just jump into Photoshop and get started. In Photoshop, we're just going to make a 1920 by 1080 comp. We can just drag and drop in the images that we want to use. You can just press enter on all these. First things first is we're just going to shift select all of them. We're going to right click, and I'm just going to rasterize these layers just because it's going to be a lot of deleting of elements. Yeah, it just makes life a lot easier. So let's just hide some of these photos, and I have 2 gate images here. I think I'm going to use number 6, so I'm just going to delete that one, and yeah, let's just scale this up to where we want it to be. So now we're going to just start cutting out bits of this scene that we want to keep. One of the main elements of this is the road. I'm just going to start there, just really roughly, and that's a nice thing about this effect. You don't need to be super precise with it. Sometimes it actually even looks better the rougher you are with the edges. So, well, that's a personal preference, but I think it looks nice when it has that kind of torn look about it. So yeah, I'm just going to come up here and we're going to just right click. We're going to make selection and feather radius 0. Then we're just going to press L on our keyboard and we're going to make a new layer via cut. So we can just name this road, and all I'm going to do now is cut out the left side and the right side, and I'll come back to you. Right, so as you can see, what we are left with is basically this, and we have them all on different layers. So let's just name these as right side and left side. Okay, so as you can see, I've kind of left this pole in, and I'm going to animate that later on. So we're going to want to give this its own layer. So let's just cut this out, something like that. Perfect. Let's make selection, L, make sure that it's the right layer selected, and we're going to make a new layer via cut, and we can just call this pole left. Let's just hide these layers now, and we're going to focus on these gates and the pillars. So pillars are fairly self-explanatory. We're just going to do the exact same thing as before, so let's just cut them out. The only thing that I really want here is going to be just this gate, so I can actually just come around and just take this element really rough. We're going to just select our inverse and delete. And now we can kind of focus a bit more on the parts that we want to keep. I'm going to keep the background that is on the gate here, but I'm going to delete all these elements up here. So let's just come in and do that. Right, so now I'm just going to come in with the lasso tool, and I'm going to try to keep some of these spikes just for a bit of detail. So You can do this whatever way you want. A quick little way to do it is just make one lasso selection, delete, and then you can kind of just keep dragging this over, delete, and yeah, you kind of get the idea. I'm just going to cut off these loose little ends here. And now we're just going to make all the layers visible, and this is what we're left with. All we're going to do is just obviously make sure that these are all labeled. So this is going to be pillar right, and then gate. Right, so doing that just makes your life so much easier in the future, because there's going to be so many different layers here that you're going to have to manage. And yeah, having a good file system is really important for this. So now that we have the main asset in the composition, we can kind of work backwards from there. So let's just come over, and I'm going to work with this asset here. So we're just going to bring number 5 underneath. We're going to just call this gate. Now we can kind of put that in a position that we like. I'm just going to scale it down a bit. Yeah, something like that. Selecting that layer, we can just now kind of remove the bits that you probably won't see, like that. Same process, we're just going to start cutting out some of the assets that we're going to animate in our After Effects file. We can just deselect that and come over here with our pen tool. I'm going to just start here and cut out this house. Just going to work around that curb like that, and I can just press Control and click a point, and then I can kind of move that to where I want it. I'm going to right click, make selection, and all I'm going to do is just do the exact same process, new layer via cut. We can hide that, and as you can see, there's a few bits here, but don't be worrying. We can just come up here and we can just delete all of those rough edges, and now we're left with that cut out. So we're just going to call this house 1. Then we're going to come back to our number 5 layer. Now we're going to try and use the Generative fill tool to kind of give this house a bit of a side to it. So basically, when we're stacking the houses, it's not going to look like there's just blank space there. So in order to do that, we can just come around the outskirts of our last selection. So we can kind of just make a rough estimate on where we think this house would technically end. So something like that. We can just right click, make selection, use our Generative fill tool, and let's just type in side of a house. Make sure that your layer is selected and just press generate. Right, so that is perfect for what we need. We can just come now, select our layer 5 and that new layer, and we're just going to merge these. We're just going to do the same processes again. We're just going to come here and cut out where we want the next house to start and come around. I'm actually very surprised at how good the side of that house is. It usually never works like that, so take that as a win. We're going to right click and we're going to make another new cut, and then it's going to be house 2. We can hide that, and then we can just delete those rough edges again. As you can see, this is our process. So we have this. When this house is going to be sliding up like this, you still see the side of that other house, and yeah, it just makes a really nice effect. Now we're just going to do the exact same thing on this house. So something like this, and now we can just make selection, generate the side of a house. This is very much hit or miss. You'll see the results are going to be pretty varied. Now another way you could do this is basically comp the side of a house in. But this is going to work perfectly for us because you're only going to see it for literally a split second. So what we can do is just merge that layer, and now we can cut this layer out. Perfect. New selection, new layer via cut, and now we can just call this house 3 and drag it underneath. Right, so now we have 3 houses cut out perfectly, and yeah, I'm just going to keep doing the rest, and I'll come back to you when I have the right side of the image done. Right, so we have all of our houses cut out, and we're just going to drag that bottom layer to the top, and we can just, any imperfections, just delete them from that layer. Right, so now we have the right side all done. We're just going to do the exact same thing. We're going to select them all, group them, and we're going to put this as right side, And now let's find our next image. Let's use this one. What's that other one that we have? Right, yeah, I'm not going to use that one today, so we can just delete that. Drag and drop that under both of our layers, and let's just position this in a space that we want it. Then like that. So let's just come back in and start cutting these out. We can just hide these other layers just so we can see what we're working with. This one will be a bit easier because we don't need to be worrying about the side of the houses on this one. So we can just cut each of these houses out individually. So the more time you take and the more elements you cut out, obviously, the better the animation is going to be. But this stuff is just painstakingly long, and it's just the same thing over and over again. But trust me, the results will be worth it when we start animating it. So we're left with this, and I think we kind of need some of these houses in the background as well. So let's just do one big cut on all of these. I think I'll add a bit of depth to the image as well. So just hide that other house just so we know where that ends, and bang. Make selection, new layer view cut. Now we can just call them houses BG. Call this road left. We can just hide this layer and see what we have. And we're just going to enable the other two layers just to see the composition. And yeah, that's looking really good now. Let's just fill this space here a bit. Come here and let's just make a selection here. And we're just going to make a new layer via copy. And just drag this here. Bring it underneath our road here. Control T and just drag this out a bit like that. So now when we enable all the layers, there's just no blank space there. That's looking pretty good like that. Last thing we're going to do is just add in the security cameras. So let's just delete that other layer, and we can, what is this one? This is going to be our road. We'll just merge these two layers here and select all these layers, and let's just group them and call it left side. These security cameras, we're going to come up and place them where we want to place them. Let's just select this. We're going to come over to select sky. Hopefully this will do a job on it, and it does. Just come in and make sure that all the selection is looking okay. We can just hold Alt and then delete the places that it's gotten wrong, or hold Shift and add in the places that it's gotten wrong as well. So yeah, that's looking pretty good like that. There's just this part here. Great, so we're just gonna right click, select the inverse, and then we're gonna make a new layer via cut, delete that background, and that should give us our security cameras all on its own layer. You can just come here and just delete these like little fringes that's attached to it, just so it's a bit sharper. And yeah, there's still some little errors in that selection, so we can just come in here and make it look a bit nicer. Great, so now what we want to do is just cut out these cameras from the pole, just so when we animate it, kind of have control of the individual cameras, and we can just put a few keyframes on them. So to do that, all I'm going to do is just basically mark out our pole here, something like that. Just add a point here and press Control, bring it up, and we can just right click, new layer via cut. So we just have our pole here. So now what we're going to do is just come up here and this selection here from the start of that camera. And we can just right click, make selection, new layer via cut as well. We can just hide that. And now we can just select here, right click, new selection, and generative fill. Let that just fill that pole. So it should look seamless, or maybe not, but that should work fine. We're just going to merge these two layers like this. Bring this layer to the bottom, and we're just going to show these two. So now we have this on the outside. If we hide that, these are all the cameras, and we can just merge this. So now we have all the cameras on one layer, and we have the pole on the other. So we can just call this cameras. And let's just select both of these, and we're just going to group them, and it's going to be called cameras. Right, so once we have all that done, it's ready to export. We have all of our different layers all laid out. We are ready to animate them. So let's just Control S on this and save it somewhere on your computer as a PSD file. Into After Effects we go. Right, let's make a new composition. As I said, this folder structure will also be in the link in the description on my Patreon. It just makes your files really neat and yeah, basically just a startup template. So in our new composition, gonna match it 1920 by 1080. We're just gonna name this main comp 25 frames per second, and we can just make it 10 seconds, which is plenty of time. Let's just come up to our PSD folder and drag and drop in that PSD that we've saved and press OK. Bring this in here. What I'm gonna do is just use motion tools here, and you can just uncomp all layers. That's one of the handiest features that I literally use basically in every single edit that I do. So really helpful tool there. So let's just start off with the gate, and we can just hide all the other stuff. We're just going to uncomp that as well and select all the layers, and we're going to give them an orange color just so we know which part of the scene that we're working with. Let's just make all these layers 3D, and this is just going to give us a bit more options when we want to animate this stuff. So for the gate, because we're going to have two sides of it, I'm just going to solo the gate here, and I could have done this in Photoshop, would have been a bit easier, but it's all good. We can just make a mask on this side, come up here, we can press Y and bring our anchor point to the side where we want it to open, and then we're just going to duplicate this and we can just invert that mask and bring it to the opposite side. All that really does is just means that we can just rotate it here, and yeah, it's kind of operating as a gate now. Make all the other layers visible, and we can start using our position keyframes to start animating all of this. So what I'm going to do is just set a position keyframe on basically the whole scene, drag this up a bit, and let's just bring it down using this. And we can just, we can just put some easing on it, so then it comes up like that. Great, so we're just going to layer it in a way so different things are going to be appearing at different times. So we're going to want the road to appear first, and then we're going to have the gates to kind of come up last. So let's see how that's looking. Great. You can also even just kind of sequence these layers as well, just to make it a bit more. I'm also going to kind of change the position of the two pillars as well, just to add in some variation there. And now we can just come over to our pole on the left, and I'm going to give this a mask, and we're going to set our path mask here, and then come back a bit and do something like that. Give that a keyframe as well, and that's also animating now. Great, that's looking pretty good. We can put that back into a comp by pressing Ctrl Shift and C, and we can just name this road comp. Now we can just go to the right side and uncomp this. We can just give this another color as well. Let's just give this a pink. Same thing, we're going to just use our position keyframe and drag all of these down. Sorry, before we do that, I just forgot to turn on the 3D layers. You can just press U to close that, press P, and then we're just going to drag these down as well. Give them some easing as well. And now we're going to make house number 1 appear last, and so on and so forth. So house 1, house 2, and this is why we kind of use that generative fill to kind of give us the side of the houses there, because it's going to give us this effect here now, where you can kind of see all the different houses popping up, and you're also getting the size in. We're going to just bring all these keyframes back a bit, just so all the stuff is kind of coming in roughly around the same time, and we can kind of just mess around with the durations here just so it makes a bit more sense. So around here is when the houses are going to start appearing, so we can just set the duration to somewhere like that, and that's looking pretty good like that. This bit here is just kind of sneaking into the scene, so what we can do is just bring this forward a tiny bit, just hide that road comp, and we're just gonna mask that annoying little jut out, just so we don't have to see that anymore. And we can just invert that. So then let's bring in the road comp. Cool, that's looking good. So now we can just do the same thing. We're gonna select all of them and Control Shift C, and let's put this as right side. We gave this an orange color, this a pink color, and now let's start editing the left side. Basically the exact same process, just uncomp it all. Select all of them. Let's give it a peach color. We're gonna make them all 3D. Select our position. Let's drag them down again. So something like that. And then we can just give them some easing as well. And we're also gonna sequence these. And let's just do something a bit random. So different houses in the sequence. Yeah, that's cool. Just gonna bring these on a bit. Change the duration of all these keyframes somewhere there, just so they're not jumping into the scene. Great. Last thing here is just to comp that. Call this right side. Let's give it that peach color. We can just delete these nulls, because when you uncomp stuff using motion tools, it just assigns a null to it, which is handy in some situations, but we actually don't need it for this. And let's just bring these cameras in for the same thing, uncomp it. The pole's going to come up first, so we can just set our position keyframes on both of them and something like that. We want it to start on that first keyframe, apply some ease on it, and we're going to have the cameras appear a lot later, so they come up on the pole. So another thing we can do is just to give us a bit more animation, we can just come up here and get our puppet tool. We're just gonna put in some pointers on these cameras that kind of make sense to animate. So I'm just doing all like the main joints of these arms here, and just press U and we can bring this back to maybe here. So they're gonna come up, and then we also want them moving a bit. So towards the end of the comp, we can just select one of them and move it a bit. Select this one, move it a bit. Something like that. Cool. That's just really subtle details that probably won't see, but do add a bit to the effect. Let's just comp these again. Call these cameras. And let's just give this a green. Okay. Delete that null. So this is how it's looking at this moment. Right. Looking really good. All we're going to do is just come here and we're going to add an adjustment layer, and we can call this frame rate and use our posterize time. And we're just going to give this, let's see, 15. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that's looking good. So I've just noticed that these houses are coming up over the road, and ideally we want them behind the road. So super simple. Oh, I've named them both. So this is actually the left side. Apologies. So we can just come in here, and on these houses, we're just going to bring the road above it. And that kind of solves that issue like that. Perfect. Right, so now we're just going to add in some video footage on top of this just to bring this to life a bit more. We're going to drag and drop in our footage, and I'm just going to right click it, and I'm going to make a new comp from selection. We're going to just double click this comp, and over here press and hold Control, click on our mouse and drag it up and down just to set the size of your brush. And then we're just going to go around our subjects here, keeping the parts that we want inside of this green brush. Just going to come around and make sure that it's getting the right part. We can keep some of that shadow in and then just remove a bit up here. Control again, just to decrease the size of the brush, and then scrub on a tiny bit, and just to see how that brush is doing. You can spend a lot of time rotoscoping stuff out just for the purpose of this tutorial. I'm gonna keep it super rough, but once you're happy, come back to the start, and I'm just gonna freeze this just so that locks those brushes in place. Because these subjects are going to be so small in our scene, you can kind of get away with some of these little artifacts and stuff happening. Right, so back in the main comp, now that we have that rotoscoped out, we can just go into the section where we're going to place that, and it's on the left side of the road, and we can just drag and drop that comp into here. We're going to make it 3D, and we're going to just scale it down a good bit. That is looking good. We're going to just link that to that road left, so it's just taking those position keyframes from it, and it just scales up like that. Amazing. Right, back into our main comp here, and I have another asset that I'm going to drop in over here on the right hand side, and that is this car on fire clip here. Go over to the right side and drag and drop that in like so. For this one, because it's such a stationary shot, we can just actually use a mask rather than rotoscoping this out, and I'm just going to keep it really rough. Cool. We're just going to scale this down. We're going to actually make it 3D, and then we're going to scale it down a good bit. I'm just going to rotate it a bit and then come over with the position and change the axis a bit, and maybe just position that somewhere where we want it. Right, let's see how that's looking. Just to start off on that video, we're just going to drag and drop this fire impact. So then let's just link that car fire comp to the road. And then this explosion, we're just going to scale it down a good bit. And that comes up, explodes. And we can just link that to the car. Right, that's looking really good. So obviously I would spend a lot more time, and I did spend a lot more time masking out the car and the fire and stuff, but you kind of get the idea on different ways you can mask video footage out and place it on top of your comp. Just because this tutorial is running so long, I'm going to break down how you do the coin drop animation over on my Patreon. I used Cinema 4D for that. You can obviously use Blender and stuff, so if that's something that you're into and want to learn, you can head over to my Patreon page, and that stage of this tutorial will be there. For now though, we're just going to go in, make these assets a tiny bit more dynamic, and then we're going to color grade it, and then we should be in a really good place. So we're going to just come into our road comp. We're just going to add some wiggle expressions to some of these assets just to make them a bit more dynamic. So to do that, we can just press P on all of our layers, Alt click on our road position keyframe, and we're just going to type in wiggle. Maybe something like 1 and 3, and we can just see how this looks on that asset alone. Yeah, so that's perfect. We can just come over here, right click, copy expression, and select the rest of these. Control V. We're just going to do the exact same thing for all the other layers. So if you see some of your layers are coming in behind, that's just because we've made them 3D. The only reason I've made these layers 3D is because in the original, I was zooming through stuff and I was using an actual a 3D camera to do that. For this, we don't necessarily need it, but if you followed along to here, we might as well just stick with it. So what we're going to do is just select our houses here, and we can just slightly position the Z-axis a bit further back, like so. And that should just fix any of those issues that you were having initially. For our road, which is going to be in front, we can just bring this a bit forward. That kind of just increases that depth a bit. Great. So now let's just do it for the remaining, and I'll come back to you so we can add the final few touches on this. Just going to add in some final touches here, and this all comes down just purely to art direction. I'm just going to drag and drop in one of these newspaper textures that I have, which will also be in the project files, and let's just put it over this road comp. I'm going to scale this up just so it covers the screen, and something like that. Great. We're going to just come down to our road comp, and we're going to duplicate it, and we can put that on top of this paper like that. And then on our paper, we're just going to make the bottom layer a track matte of that paper. As you can see, nothing is happening, and that's just because basically the layers have the exact same keyframes. On this top road comp, we can just bring it forward a tiny bit, so just offsets it, and as you can see, this gives it like an undertone, and that newspaper is kind of showing just underneath before the animation fully takes place. I just think it adds a really nice touch to the effect. So last thing we need to do is just grade this, and all we're going to do for that is just come over, let's make a new adjustment layer, and let's call this grain. We're going to add grain in our effects panel and drag it on top of this. Up here, let's just change this to a final output, and we're going to just change the animation to something like 0.1. Just going to make this full resolution just so I can see the grain here. The intensity, we can put it to something like 1.7, and the size, you can kind of play with this. I'm going to do something like that is looking good. Come over to our color, and we're just going to up the saturation to something like 1.5. Next thing we're going to do is just add in another adjustment layer. We're going to call this levels, put it on top of that, and we can just come over here and crunch this a tiny bit. Just make it a bit brighter. Great. Last but not least, we're just going to come over, last adjustment layer, and we're going to call this color. Get a Lumetri color, drag it on top of this, and let's just come down to our curves and do like a small little S curve, and then we can just come to our creative and up this a lot just to make it really punchy. And here is what you're left with. So, I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. It was a bit of a longer one, but there was so much stuff to get through there. And that's why I can't really go through the hand coin animation. It would just be nearly 40 minutes if we went into it. Hopefully this isn't already 40 minutes. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Let me know in the comment section below if there's any other type of videos that you'd like to see. And yeah, cheers.